Hi everyone, this is Amy.
Hiya.
Amy's a marine biologist, dive master, and a great friend of Helicon watches. In fact, she is our test driver, putting the Helicon Master to the ultimate test over the past year. Diving with it, well, I said 7 days a week, but you said it was less.
More around 5 or 6 days a week.
But essentially, you are working in the water.
I am, yeah.
It's your daily job.
Yeah, exactly.
Your 9 to 5 is in the water.
Exactly.
And it's a challenging environment because you have to look after far more than marine conservation, because you're a marine biologist by qualification.
Yeah.
You have to look after ecology, biology, research, and safety.
Exactly.
That's right, isn't
exactly.
it? Yeah. And it's a demanding work, and we're thrilled because, as you know, we're a small family business. We've known Amy most of her life, and the fact that she's now working in an environment where we can hopefully support her and test our watches is really good. So the purpose of this is to give you an insight into her life and really what it's like to be a marine biologist.
Yeah, great.
So can you share with us what inspired you to become a marine biologist and a master diver?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, truthfully speaking, I probably couldn't pinpoint the exact time in my life when I decided to do marine biology or become a marine biologist. I think it's safe to say I've always had an interest in the ocean and in the marine environment growing up. And then I decided to study it at university, do my BSc in conservation. And I think through doing that, I really found a love for marine biology and I became so passionate about it. I was really lucky growing up. We had so many family trips where we were snorkeling most days. Namely back in 2014, we went to the Maldives as a family. We were snorkeling with whale sharks, and I've kind of done a 360, and I've now ended up back there and ended up working with them, which is just a dream come true.
And I think what's interesting, isn't it, is that you've done, as you said, a degree in marine biology.
Yeah.
Then you went and did your master's.
Yeah.
But to go back and work in that environment, whilst it looks amazing and glamorous, is a different perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely has its challenges, and it's not been easy to get there. Anyone that has done marine biology or most sciences for that matter will know how much work and money you have to pour into this. It's not just a case of, putting your head down and studying for 5 years. There is so much more to it. With my dive master, I've had to fork out, a whole load of extra money for that. And it's more than just the studying part. You then have to get your experience and hopefully eventually end up in a job.
And let's just go on that, because I think that's really interesting. So we're in London, where we live close by each other in London. So to go from London, which is not really near the sea, we've got the Thames, and to go back into that environment must be a real cultural and environmental change for you. So I just want to go through, because you've just returned from a secondment, is that right to say?
Yeah.
And you're going on the next one, which will reveal, hopefully in future videos, Amy's going to update us. So just explain to me your working week, or what you're doing, because I said you're not doing this as a hobby, this is your work. So just explain to me what a working week for Amy looks like.
So, well, I was previously working in the Seychelles, which is, as you know, where I've returned from recently. And that kind of involved taking people out on these whale shark tours, going to sea sharks and any sort of marine life that we could find along the way. And the main kind of purpose of these trips was to go out there, collect as much data as possible, and hopefully kind of compile at the end of this a huge database that we can then use in the future, or hand out to students that are doing their marine biology degrees across the country, across the world. They can use this data, or scientists that have already established themselves in marine conservation, and they can create projects and develop research from this. So going out, usually 9 o'clock in the morning, maybe even earlier, to go and look for the whale sharks. And as soon as we find one, get in the water, jump in the water, get as many photographs as you can, try and measure the shark, identify its sex, observe any behavior, and make sure you write basically as much information down as possible. But obviously, with that comes, you need to respect the animal, you need to respect its space, you need to respect safety, not just of you, but of the animal as well. And it's bringing all of that together on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, data being so important, but you have to think about all of these other things as well. And
I think what's interesting, and I think you've touched on it there, is that whilst you're working in ecotourism, you are affiliated with a charity, we support you. You are recording data.
Exactly.
So you're recording the data on the animal themselves and the environmental impact.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you're working, I believe, in lieu with the local government in terms of conservation programs, data research, because it's a big thing.
Exactly.
I'm going to say ecotourism, but I think that's a bit of a clumsy word, because I think what you're talking about is maintaining the habitat and the environment for future generations to hopefully enjoy. So there's a careful balance there, isn't it?
There is, and I have to be careful about throwing around the word ecotourism, because at the end of the day, well, this job that I'm going on to work in the Maldives is I'm going to be based in a resort.
Yeah.
I'm taking guests out like yourself, you know, the average person, I guess, not necessarily scientists, to go and look for these whale sharks, to go and look for marine life. But then the purpose of taking these people out, for me as a marine biologist on the boat, I'm going out to collect data and to collect as much research and information as we possibly can, but I'm still engaging with guests that have come from a resort. We're taking them out to swim with whale sharks. 50 to 60% of them will not care what I'm there for.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, because it is ecotourism, but at the same time we are trying to kind of benefit from ecotourism and use ecotourism to collect our data. It kind of just makes
But I think it's
feasible.
an interesting point. You start at the beginning of this discussion talking about it. You yourself and your mind has been imprinted by being a member of that tour.
Yeah.
So like you're going to light a spark, hopefully,
exactly.
in another generation.
Yeah. And I really hope. I think as I've spent more and more time in marine conservation and having had more opportunities to be in the field, I think what I've learned actually that my passion is passing this information on to other people and trying to educate other people, because it's where I found my love for marine science. You know, that holiday that I had in the Maldives with my family, I spent the whole week that we were there asking this marine biologist all of these questions. And I think, you know, as I've grown up, I've realised that's what I want to do. I want to pass on that knowledge to other people, show these people, look how amazing these animals are, and, you know, highlight the importance of needing to protect them and the ecosystems that they live in.
And on that note, I know that you did a presentation in the last year, didn't you? What was that about?
So I then, after I finished my BSc, I went on to do my Masters at Plymouth Uni as well. And I basically was asked by the charity that I'm now going out to work with if I would come and present my research at a conference that they host in the Maldives. I think they do it every year. They've been doing it for 5 years now. So I was presenting at the 5th symposium. And it's a conference that attracts like-minded marine biologists, conservationists that have done some work involving the marine environment in the Maldives. And we all come together and we share all of the information and the research that we've gathered over the last year or so. And so my presentation was, I focused my research on looking at interatoll movements made by whale sharks in the Maldives. So it was following their movement patterns, you know, were these movements kind of coinciding with seasonal events? Was it monsoons? Was it changes in prey availability throughout the year? It was looking at all of these impacts that were influencing the whale sharks. But yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic opportunity. Great to see so many people in the same room, all kind of pioneering for the same thing. I
suppose the nature of the work is very isolated. So
exactly.
to have a group of marine biologists is not common. And I think it gave you a real boost, didn't it, to see that the work you had done was really being appreciated and understood, and you were contributing to the community.
Exactly. And meeting the local people as well, that it meant so much to as well. You know, it's a really rewarding, of course, challenging at times industry to be in. You know, there's not a lot of money in it. It's a really difficult industry to be working in at times. But then when you are invited to events like this and you have the opportunity to speak to these people, it is so rewarding to be part of that.
And I think that you've made a good point, because I think I wanted to try and impress on everyone. When you're working, it's pretty remote, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you're working in locations that are tiny. I mean, how big was the island you're on before?
I mean, you can walk across it in probably 25 minutes, half an hour. It's just crazy.
You're working there. You're in the water, as I said to you, in a working week. You're responsible for safety, for organising your day, for all the equipment that you have to look after.
Yeah.
So you've got lots of things. So it's a fairly stressful and solo profession, isn't it? You're doing your own thing, and even though people come and go and you're working with certain people, it's difficult. So I just want to go through what is a typical day for you like? What do you start at what time, and what would you have to get up?
I would say probably 7 o'clock in the morning is a reasonable time to wake up. And then I think, well, in this job that I will be going into, it really depends on how much interest there is from the guests at the resort. So people will put their names forward for a whale shark tour. They will say, yes, we'd like to go out at 1 o'clock or whatever. So that does change. But generally we will take kind of between 4 and 5 tours out a week.
Right.
And you're looking at around a 4-hour tour every time.
Yeah.
So we will spend 4 hours on the water, specifically this marine protected area. So where I'm going to work in the Maldives, they have a year-round aggregation of whale sharks, which is really unusual for whale sharks. Usually we see them seasonally. So across the world, places like Australia, Mexico, you get seasonal aggregations of whale sharks. They can only be seen there for a few months of the year, and that's because a whole kind of bloom of phytoplankton has come into the area, and the whale sharks are feeding on that plankton.
Is that food is what's driving them?
It is, yeah.
And is that seasonal and can be guaranteed, or is everything changing in the world so much that that's really varying now?
It is.
So one year to the next,
Yeah.
it could really change.
And that is what we're seeing more and more, is that actually, you know, the distribution of whale sharks is completely shifting. Prey availability is completely shifting. Temperatures obviously completely different. So they're, you know, where we're kind of likely to find these whale sharks is completely changing year on year.
Right.
Which is why this kind of work is so important now. You know, tracking their movements, tracking our sightings and encounters with them is so important to kind of try and figure out these new patterns that are developing, you know, every day. But with this particular aggregation at the moment, you're pretty much guaranteed to see whale sharks there all year round because the conditions are just perfect. So we're looking for whale sharks in an area where you are guaranteed whale sharks 99% of the time. But with this particular aggregation at the moment, you're pretty much guaranteed to see whale sharks there all year round because the conditions are just perfect. So we're looking for whale sharks in an area where you are guaranteed whale sharks 99% of the time.
And with the whale sharks, I just want to put a picture in people's minds. So when you've got a whale shark in the morning, in the water, you're talking about the size of...
The ones in the Maldives specifically, you're not looking at any bigger than 7 meters, which is still enormous.
Yeah.
But on average, whale sharks can grow up to 18.8 meters. Is the largest recorded whale shark.
Right. So I just want to put this image in your mind. So you're there on the boat.
Yeah.
You're hoping for this meat.
Exactly.
Right? It comes along. You then have to corral your guests and yourself into the water.
Yeah.
We've talked about some diving. We'll talk about it later. So you're mainly free diving with these whale sharks. And what's your distance? What's the sort of distance you have to work within? Because obviously, even at 7 meters, a movement can be pretty substantial. Exactly. I mean, how big is the tail of a whale shark?
Well, I wouldn't know measurements, but I know that you have to stay well away from it because they do. This is what they use. They use their tail to swim. They use their tail to steer themselves in the water, and it moves fast and it moves far.
But I would imagine the volume of water that it pushes that can move you before the tail.
Yeah, exactly. So we say generally you want to keep about a 3 meter distance from their head and 4 meters from their tail.
Right. Okay.
And I've said to so many people, and I'm not sure how many people believe me because of their size, they're not dangerous animals until you get in their way.
Yeah.
You know, like with any animal, if they feel that they're, you know, at harm or they're at risk, they're not going to hesitate to use that tail, not necessarily to hit you on purpose, but they will move the tail to try and swim away from you, and that could put you in any sort of danger. So, you know, it's also about respecting them, and it's about protecting them, but also yourselves as well, because it kind of have its repercussions.
And when you're with the shark, I mean, how much time do you spend in the water solo with the sharks? Because you've got a data job and you've got to be looking around and be aware. So is there time when you've got time to scientifically record? In my
previous job in the Seychelles, I would be the first person in the water, and I would have no more than a couple of minutes, because obviously everyone is desperate to get into the water. They hang around for a while. Most of the time you probably are looking at a 5-minute encounter with a whale shark. It's pretty quick. So obviously people are desperate to get into the water, but I would be in first and try and collect as much data as possible. And at that time I had people on the boat that I was shouting up to saying, I think it's this big, it's a male, it's got these injuries. You know, that was how we were doing the data collection before, because it's quite difficult to be writing, swimming and looking at the whale shark at the same time. I think in this instance, when I go out to the Maldives, it's going to be slightly different. I will be getting into the water at the same time as everybody else, and it will be a case of collecting my data opportunistically with the other people in the water, probably having a waterproof sheet that I can write things down But because it's a bit more commercial, this job, it's, as we said, it's a bit more of an ecotourism kind of job. We will be prioritizing the guests as well. So yeah, I will be collecting data opportunistically, hoping that the whale shark will hang around.
But this is a fairly, there's a great deal of responsibility for you. But then I just want to go on to your diving, because we've talked about that, haven't we, before? So you're diving when you're using tanks. You trained, because you said Plymouth is where you went to university. So a very different environment. Diving in Plymouth, around the UK coast. So your visibility is much greater. The water temperature obviously is much greater. But on the equipment you're using, is there much difference in the equipment in terms of what you're carrying with you or what you have on the boat?
I wouldn't say, well, between free diving and diving, obviously there's a massive difference. You have to have all of your tanks, your BCD, regulators, everything. It's not hugely different. Do you mean between diving in Plymouth and
I'm actually
like
saying, when you're going to the Maldives, your dive equipment, when you're putting that together, that's going to be carried on the boat with you, because obviously you don't know what you're going to be working at on a day-to-day basis. So I'm saying you've now gone through various levels of qualification. So now you've got your master diver certification. That's right. Dive master. We've got to, because we were talking about a challenge that I went on where the guy went down to 224 meters, which is a totally different ball game. We're talking about different mixes, different gases. But so master diver qualification. So I'm saying your equipment that you put together for that is the same, will be the same in terms of that, your weights, your regulator.
Yes, exactly. You generally have, and if you do a lot of diving, you would generally have your own equipment. So you would have your own BCD, you'd have your own set of regulators, same weight belt and everything, and that generally doesn't change. It's best to have your own gear because it's reliable. You know when it's been serviced and the rest of it.
And I don't dive anymore because I have a problem with my regulator.
Exactly.
Which, that's a massive problem because it wasn't my gear. So I think you're exactly right to have
you have to be, and it's one of those things. Like with a lot of things, you have to be. It's better to be safe than sorry. You need to know that your gear is in order and it's working perfectly. And in that sense, it's much better to have your own gear. So as a result, you would have the same gear on the boat every day.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we've also talked about the fact that you are a woman. And we've also talked about safety in terms of you really have to be responsible for your and your guests' safety. And that's something you take very seriously. When you had your conference, was there a large female contingent of marine biologists? Do you think it's changing in there?
I would actually say I do think it is, and I was quite surprised, to be honest with you, at how many women were either sat in the audience watching the presentations or presenting themselves. I would say probably 70% of the presenters were females.
Right.
And what I will say is that the Maldives, I think, although it can be very difficult to work there with visas and the rest of it and funding, I do think the Maldives is one of a few places that are actually encouraging women to work in marine science there. They are companies such as the Manta Trust, Olive Ridley Turtle Project. They're all marine biology companies based in the Maldives working towards conservation, and a lot of their workforce are women, whether it's locals or internationals such as myself. I do think that actually more and more we are seeing women, having a place high up in marine conservation and marine biology.
Well, that's really good. And as you know, we're a brand co-founded by a woman and designed by a woman. And we want to support whoever it is in their chosen fields. And I think it's really important. And probably, as I said to you before, your age is already developing the next generation, which I think is really important because I think people have got to be very conscious of our environment and how we are affecting it and how it's changing. And if we're not careful, we'll lose it.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about the Helicon watch. So this was quite a funny story. So I said we've known each other quite a while. I messaged Amy. You were already out there, weren't you?
I was in the Seychelles,
we were WhatsApping. So I said to Amy, would you like to test one of our watches? And we sent it out there and I said, right, choose a watch, take it out there. And first thing I'd like to say, because we went to British Watchmakers Show and the people asking us about desk divers, and I said, well, we're not making desk divers, we're making tools that people use. So I just sent you in fact, I think I sent you one of our photographic samples. You took it out there. Your mum said to you, who I know quite well, said, well, be careful. And I said, don't be careful, just wear the watch, because if it doesn't stand up to what we're giving you, it's not worth it. So when you wore the watch, which you actually resized and you got it to my size, it was did you find it rewarding to have a watch on it?
It was amazing. And I mean, it's such a beautiful watch, and so for what I'm doing, just so important as well. And I know, you know, part of the, not agreement, but part of our partnership was about getting some nice photos and stuff and putting them on Instagram. Of course, that's all part of it. But at the end of the day, it was fantastic to just have that every day whilst I was diving. As we've discussed, as a backup watch, it was, you know, you have your dive computer every day, which I did in the Seychelles, but then having this your watch on my other wrist, it's so important. And I think people don't realize, you know, how important it is for things like what I'm doing.
And I think I told you on the dives that I went on, the dive computer failed.
Yeah,
you know,
and it happens.
And it happens. And I think people do. It's always good to have a backup.
Of course.
And I think the other thing for you, which was quite interesting, is I always say you are carrying weights, tanks. Watches get bashed, don't they? I mean, I'm sure that's been bashed.
It happens.
And that's why we build a robust watch, because it's a tool, it's an instrument. And I said, just use it. If it has a problem, we'll deal with it. And so far it hasn't, which is great. And it's going to go off in the next
Still
journey.
looks beautiful.
Yeah, but in fact, I said to Amy, do you want a different colour? And you said, no, I like this one.
No, I do really like it.
And that's
it's a
the
lovely
point.
watch.
It should be a possession for you. So Amy and I had a load of questions. We've not gone through those questions, but we probably will do in future. But I just want to make something important. Amy is a friend of ours. I mean, we've known Amy for a long time. She's doing something very special. We want to support her in that. As she said, it's not an easy profession to be involved with, and every little thing that matters. So when you do buy a Helicon, we want to help Amy in the same way. I'm going to put a link down in the video description to the charity that you work with, and we'll be having updates from Amy as she goes through the year, because it is going to be a big adventure. At times it's going to be isolated. You're going to have weather to deal with, guests to deal with, and of course nature itself, which no one can govern either. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure.
It's
and
lovely.
More updates coming from Amy. And if you want any particular questions, or you have questions for Amy, just drop them in the comments below and we'll answer them, or Amy will answer them.
I will. I'll try my very best.
Thanks for coming on, Amy.
Thank you.